Welcome to r/Prorevenge, where a guy sends his cheating ex to jail for 10 years. Not sure if this is petty or pro, but it was certainly creative and extremely funny at the time, so I'll try here. I live in an apartment building which has end-to-end parking for 2 spaces per apartment, and access to the parking levels 1 through 5 are done via a locked automatic roller door which people can only get through if they have a remote for it, or sneak through behind someone else. I only have a single car, and sometimes I let my friends park in the space in front of my car if they give me notice. So I generally park at the back of the double space, plus it's easier for my neighbors who have 2 cars. Earlier this year, a random car began parking in front of mine on Friday afternoons, meaning I couldn't go out with my car on Friday nights. Annoying, but not the biggest issue when you live super close to the city. Side note, OP posted a diagram of the problem which I'll show now. This continued nearly every week over about 5 weeks when I didn't park my car at the front of the bay, which I began doing. But times I planned to leave the space free for friends coming over or whatever, the car appeared again. I made repeated attempts to stop this behavior by leaving notes, which escalated into leaving printouts of a photo of the car with the license plate clearly visible and an explanation that if it happened again, I'd press charges and/or have the vehicle towed. Well, it happened again, and this time it was still there Saturday afternoon when I had been planning on going away with a group of my mates. My guess is someone went out on Friday, got drunk, and decided to pick up the car later, not concerning themselves with the inconvenience it caused anyone else. It clearly hadn't moved, as my aggressive note telling them to F off was still there, sitting limply under their wiper blades. I figured enough was enough. It was time to have the vehicle towed, so I called the building management and eventually called a towing company, who refused to help because the space was on the 3rd floor and they can't get any trucks up to that level because of the height and space restrictions. Ordinarily, most people would be pretty much screwed at this point, and I will admit, I briefly considered sitting on the hood of the car until the jerk came to pick it up while sending my mates on their way without me. But they would have had to work out a new arrangement for transportation as one car wouldn't have cut it. Fortunately for me, however, my parents only live 30 minutes away and have a garage where I work on one of my cars that's getting at the tail end of a minor restoration. One of the things I use pretty often is a set of vehicle positioning jacks to jam my project car right up against the wall of the garage to minimize the space it takes up. For anyone who doesn't know, vehicle positioning jacks are basically devices that slot under each wheel, then lift the car up on hydraulics so you can freewheel it in any direction. While I hadn't originally gone to retrieve them, when I had to take my project car off them, a bright idea came to my head. None of my mates minded spending an extra hour to screw someone over that had interfered with us. So we grabbed the jacks and went back, propped the car up, and wheeled it out. 6 guys can easily move around a small hatchback. So we pushed across the level slowly and carefully to an area where there isn't parking, but is a load supporting pillar with space enough for a car behind it in a little section of the garage where it isn't lit, and is completely out of the way. Typically, there's a guy on my level that parks a motorbike there, but he isn't meant to, and I doubt he minded. We dumped it between the pillar and the wall, with the nose pointing towards the wall. I took my angry note, the jacks, and we left to enjoy our weekend. Side note, here's a diagram of what they did. When we came back Monday afternoon after the long weekend, the car was still there, which was no real surprise considering there was only about a foot of space for movement between the pillar and car, and another foot or so between the car and the wall. From the fact that the front wheels had changed, we're guessing they did try to get it out, unsuccessfully. It was eventually gone later in the week, though I'm not exactly sure how they managed it. I never saw that car again. Trapping that guy's car between the pillar was a really clever solution, but to be honest, I'd be tempted to do a lot more. I mean, if they had just wheeled the car a couple of streets over, then that dude probably would have never found his car. Before I start, a little background on my family. My father is a typical working class man from a poor family who worked pretty much his entire life. My mom, on the other hand, comes from a very important and respected family of my city. Her family is wealthy, with strong connections, and are friends with pretty much all the important people of my city, from the mayor and his entourage to lawmen and businessmen. Now, my mom and dad met a long time ago and fell in love instantly. Soon they were married. My mom's family disliked my dad from the beginning. They saw him as a poor pleb and a disgrace to the family. When my brother and I came along, they also demanded us to be named from members of their side of the family since we would have my dad's last name, etc., etc. You get the point. Posh, arrogant pricks. When I was 8 and my brother 9, our mom got diagnosed with cancer. 3 years later, she died. My dad was alongside her the entire time. Her own family was not. Her sister, my aunt, was always absent in some formal reception and always claimed she was busy. And her mother, my grandmother, was claiming she was too old to move while her health was perfect. In total, they barely visited my mom in 3 years. The day my mom died, we were devastated. Both me and my brother cried like babies. We were kids, actually, 12 and 13 respectively, and our dad was in shambles. Then it all happened. A few hours later, my dad gets a phone call. It's from my aunt and says they need to meet instantly, so he goes to meet them. What followed was mental. My aunt, with a lawyer on her side, started attacking my dad, telling him that now that his wife is dead, he was incapable of having custody of the kids, me and my brother, and that they should take care of us. My dad was furious and said no. They responded the next day with more pestering and abuse. Mind you, the funeral hadn't even taken place yet. This went on for years, each time different demands. They ended up accusing my dad of assaulting my aunt, causing a lot of people to turn their backs on us. They started sending my dad legal papers on what they could do, etc., etc. Then they tried taking away our inheritance based on stupid stuff. We ended up finding out that some money reserved for us had suddenly vanished, and then they called us and threatened my dad that if he doesn't give custody, they will not give us the money. Thanks to a stupid law in my country, they could do that. My dad felt awful. Many times we caught him crying on top of piles of papers or hitting his head on the table in despair. In the night, we could hear him crying from our room and could do nothing about it. They made his life a torture. The only thing that kept him sane was my brother and I, and he was great as a dad. He provided for us, and despite his mental state being awful, he was an amazing dad. Fast forward 10 years later, the abuse stopped. My father found a girlfriend who is amazing and are happy together. Both my brother and I got accepted into university and are doing pretty well. My mom's family have stopped talking to us, and every time they try to make contact, we promptly ignore them. Until this summer. You see, this summer, my cousin got married. They invited us to the wedding. When I say us, I mean my brother and I. So we accepted and started crafting the plan. Because in my country, weddings are a huge deal and a lot of people would be there. And also because of the social status of my mom's family, the most important people would be there. So we decided to use that to our advantage. You see, a lot of people had no clue about the whole story, only the parts they told them. It was exposure time. The big day arrives and I'm full on ready. I go to the church and outside I see the people. Then my brother arrives and we know stuff is about to go down. The reception starts and we are patiently waiting for it to end and the after party to begin. In the after party, which was a huge mansion outside the city, everyone is present. We spot my aunt and my grandmother in a group of people. One of these people is the mayor. Bingo! So we approach them in a friendly way. My aunt says to these people the classics, "Have you met my nephews?" etc., etc. Then we start hearing the conversation a bit. As we predicted, they started talking about my dad, how horrible he was, how he exploited my mom, and how lucky we are that we came out bright, unlike him. That last one pissed me off. I raise my glass, I look my aunt in the eyes, and inside the whole group of the most wealthy, important, and prestigious people of my city, I say, actually, I unleash the whole story, all while praising my dad and condemning my aunt and grandmother. If I left anything out, my brother would fill in. After I finished, complete silence fell. My aunt was red from anger. My grandmother was on the verge of bursting into tears. Everyone else shocked. They started looking at those two in dismay and anger. My little cousin, not the one getting married, who was oblivious to the whole situation, wanted to just leave and was constantly asking my aunt, "Mom, is that true?" The story was presented with such attention to detail that they couldn't even deny anything. Then we say the bombshell. At least we came out fine. Our studies are going excellent, all thanks to our dad. That last one was to rub salt in all their wounds. We then left them in shock. From other people, we later learned that everyone turned their backs on them. They became the shame of the city and ended up isolated in their big, fancy houses. The mayor cut all contacts with them, so did all the businessmen and everyone, in fact. The big bomb was when a business they owned shut down because no one would fund them. I only feel sorry for their employees who were left without a job. Another big hit came when the municipal council, clearly by the mayor's orders, removed the commemorative plaques in some buildings they had donated money in. That killed them inside. They tried to reconcile afterwards, but we ignored them. The most beautiful thing was when my dad learned of what we did. He was the happiest man alive, seeing the rich, arrogant buttholes who tormented him go down like that. Don't mess with us, even if you are family. I can't believe these people are so incredibly conceited that they actually thought that the son and the daughter would be on their side. Hey there, niece and nephew, come hang out with the most important people in the city and join us in trashing on your father, who you obviously still love very much. I don't see any way how this could possibly backfire. Around the time that I got my first full-time job and finished college, I decided I was ready to venture out and start dating. I had heard about this amazing app through a few of my coworkers, a little thing called Tinder. So I decided to give it a shot. After about a week on the app, I finally matched with a woman who we will call Talia. Talia lived in a different city than I did, but the day we matched, she said she was visiting a cousin. We messaged through the app, and after verifying she was real through her Facebook and Instagram profiles, we exchanged phone numbers. She said she was employed full-time, had an apartment and her own car, and was somehow still single. We talked for about 2 weeks on the phone, always at night after my shift at work, before we finally had a chance to meet when our schedules matched up. I drove my beat-up 1996 Honda Civic to her town, spent that Friday night, I forget where we ate that night, and in the morning we had breakfast at Waffle House. Talia did have her own apartment, however, she lived next door to her grandmother, who I awkwardly had to meet the next morning. I learned from Talia that her car was actually in her grandmother's name, and her apartment was in the name of her cousin. She went so far as to show me family portraits with her cousin to talk about her abusive ex, and even shared with me how her laundry room was embarrassingly infected with flies and roaches. We officially changed our social media to dating that day. Keep in mind that this was my first relationship in almost 4 years, so I was excited. The scam. Talia also told me that day that she had been fired from work about a week earlier but was too embarrassed to tell me. I asked how she had kept up her bills, and she said that her grandma and dad had been helping her. Talia asked if I could help her make her car payment, which was due that weekend. I refused. She then explained that she could get a payday loan, which is banned in our state, and could put it into my checking account. I felt uneasy about it and asked if there was another way she could get the loan. Talia said that she couldn't use her grandma or dad's accounts because they had burned her in the past. I thought it was weird, but she started crying. So I called my bank, where I had an account since high school graduation, and opened a linked checking account. I gave Talia the new checking account number and routing number. Talia contacted a payday loan company in Alabama, and by Sunday morning, she had the funds in my linked checking account. Per our agreement, I gave her the money. Talia promised to repay the loan within 2 weeks. I had my reservations, but went back home and back to work Monday. Talia called me on Wednesday and said she had a new job. I asked if she had the payday loan squared away with her first paycheck. She said she did, but I still got charged $47 2 weeks after she set up the loan. I called my bank, called Talia to verify the loan was going through her, and terminated the charge from the payday loan as I was not the signed person. Talia and I agreed to meet Memorial Day weekend 2 weeks later. She stated that her dad had given her a check for the entire amount, $1,800, and that she would deposit it into my bank near her. Like a fool, I let her deposit the check right before Memorial Day weekend. 2 weeks later, the payday loan company charged another $47 plus penalty fees and another $47. The $1,800 check bounced. Talia stopped answering her calls and blocked me on everything. I called my bank and informed them that I was the victim of fraud. Within hours, my main checking account, into which my paycheck had gone, my savings account with $800 saved for a new car, and the new checking account were closed. My best friend from college, we'll call him Clark, found Talia had 2 of every social media account. the one she shared with me and the one on which she had a boyfriend. Her cousin from her family photos was actually her boyfriend since high school. Talia was 22 or 23. Her boyfriend, we'll call him Jason, was in prison. But from their social media posts, she was visiting him once a month minimum and had plans to marry him. I spent days trying to get back my accounts and my money. One of the representatives from my bank, Ann Clark and my mom, advised that I should press charges for fraud. The bank mailed me a copy of the bounce check for criminal investigation purposes, and it showed Jason's name and not Talia's father's name as the owner of the check. That's when I decided to get revenge. The revenge. As mentioned before, Talia's apartment had a minor infestation of cockroaches and flies in her laundry room. While I went through legal agencies to pursue pressing charges of forgery on the check and fraud, etc., I found the name and phone number of Talia's apartment complex. I left a message for the apartment complex management that Talia and her grandmother both had filthy apartments. Within a week, Clark showed me that Talia had posted a request for temporary housing for her and her grandma since her parents wouldn't let her move in. Talia's payday loan company began calling me as Talia had given them my phone number instead of hers, and they had not received payment yet. I was still reviewing my legal options at the time. One day, I answered and notified the rep that Talia had fraudulently used my checking account. The rep who called me transferred me to their legal department, who was very interested. It turned out that Talia's grandma and her father owed to the payday loan company. It wasn't a lot separately, but the payday loan company had enough evidence with my claim that Talia was the ringleader using her family's accounts. I turned over my evidence, including Talia's text messages promising to pay, the copy of the bounced check, and my bank statements. By the end of the year, Talia was arrested on several charges. Her grandma and father were also arrested, but took pleas for lesser charges in exchange for turning over evidence on her. I didn't have to testify at the trial, but I kept informed. Talia's grandma had a minor heart attack when she was arrested and had a more significant one during the trial. I am not sure if her grandma lived or died after the trial. Despite this, Talia went to prison for multiple counts and will serve more than a decade behind bars. I've heard of some pretty rough breakup stories, but this guy takes it to a whole nother level. After exactly 1 day, this guy gets his ex-girlfriend and his grandma evicted, causes the grandma to have 2 heart attacks, and sends his ex to jail for a decade. That was rSlash and if you want to see more videos just like this one, hit the subscribe button and like this video. It really helps me out.